Captain Jake Martinez sat in his command chair aboard the EU's Phoenix, watching the stars through the main screen. The ship hummed quietly as it moved through deep space, far from Earth and farther than any human had ever traveled before. Jake had been exploring space for 5 years now, ever since humanity had figured out how to travel faster than light. Most of the time, space was empty and boring. Today would be different. "Captain, I'm getting something strange," called Lisa Parker. From her station, she was the ship's communications officer, a young woman with short brown hair who had joined the crew 2 years ago. Her voice sounded excited and worried at the same time. Jake turned his chair toward her. "What kind of strange?" Lisa's fingers moved quickly over her control panel. "It's a signal, sir. But it's not from Earth or any of our colonies. The pattern is all wrong. It's like someone is trying to talk to us, but they don't know how we communicate." The bridge went quiet, except for the soft beeping of computers. Jake felt his heart beat faster. For years, humans had wondered if they were alone in the universe. They had found dead planets in empty space, but never any sign of other intelligent life. "Oh, maybe that was about to change. Can you make sense of it?" Jake asked. Lisa shook her head. "Not yet, but I think it's using math, basic math, that anyone with intelligence should understand. Give me some time and I might be able to figure out what they're trying to say." Jake nodded. "Amy, stop the ship. We're not going anywhere until we know what this is about." Chen. The ship's pilot slowed the Phoenix to a stop. She was a small woman with quick hands and quicker reflexes, who could fly anything with engines. "Stopped, Captain. We're holding position." The next 3 days, Lisa worked on the signal. She barely slept, barely ate, spending all her time trying to understand what the aliens were saying. The rest of the crew waited and helped when they could. Rick Johnson, the engineer, made sure the ship's computers were running perfectly. Katie Brown, the ship's doctor, brought Lisa food and made sure she didn't work herself to death. Tom Garcia, their Marine sergeant, kept watch and cleaned his weapons, because he believed in being ready for anything. On the 3rd day, Lisa finally cracked it, Captain, she called out, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. "I've got it. I know what they're saying." Jake rushed to her station, along with the rest of the crew. Lisa's screen showed rows of numbers and symbols, but at the bottom was text in plain English. "Please help us, Lisa. Read aloud. The Devourers have returned. Our worlds burn. We are the last of the gentle races. If anyone receives this, we beg. You, come quickly before we are all consumed." The bridge fell silent. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't the friendly first contact that everyone on Earth had hoped for. This was a cry for help from beings that were dying. "Where is the signal coming from?" Jake asked. Lisa checked her instruments. The Kepler 442 system about 30 light-years away. "Captain, they're asking for help, but we don't know anything about them or what they're fighting." Jake looked at his crew. He saw the same questions in their eyes that were in his mind. They were explorers, not soldiers. The Phoenix was a science ship with basic weapons and shields. Oh, what could they do against something called Devourers that was burning entire worlds? But the message kept playing over and over. Someone out there was dying, and they had asked for help. Jake had grown up believing that when someone needed help, you helped them if you could. It didn't matter if they were human or alien.
Ow.
Jake said to the Marine, "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them what we found and where we are. Then prepare for possible combat." Tom nodded and got to work. Jake knew that Commander Sarah Williams back on Earth would want to know about this immediately. She was in charge of all human space exploration, and first contact with aliens was exactly the kind of thing she needed to handle. "Amy, plot a course for the Kepler system," Jake continued. "But don't engage the hyperdrive yet. Let's wait and see what Earth says." Ugh. The message to Earth would take hours to arrive, and the reply would take hours to come back. While they waited, Jake gathered his crew in the ship's small meeting room. "I want everyone to understand what we might be getting into," he said. "We've just made first contact with aliens, but they're in the middle of some kind of war. We don't know what they look like, how they think, or what they're fighting. All we know is that they're scared and they need help." Katie the doctor spoke first. "Captain, my job is to save lives. If there are people out there who need help, Then we should try to help them. Rick nodded. The ship is in good shape. Can make the jump to their system if we need to. Tom was checking his rifle while he talked. Sir, I've got enough weapons and ammo for a small fight. But if we're talking about something that can burn entire worlds, we might be in over our heads. Amy was quiet for a moment, then said, I can get us there and get us out fast if we need to run. Lisa looked worried. Captain, what if this is a trap? What if these devourers are trying to trick us into coming to them? Jake had thought about that too. It's possible. But the message didn't ask us to come alone or to bring anything specific. It just asked for help. That sounds real to me. They talked for another hour, going over every possibility they could think of. At the end, they all agreed on one thing. If someone was asking for help, they had to try to give it. The reply from Earth Command came 18 hours later. Commander Sarah Williams' message was short and clear. Phoenix, you are authorized to investigate. Proceed with extreme caution. Additional ships are being prepared, but you are our only asset in the area. Use your best judgment. Earth is proud of you. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was about to take his ship and crew into unknown danger, possibly making decisions that would affect all of humanity's future relationships with alien species. All right, people, he announced over the ship's intercom. We're going to answer their call for help. Emmy, engage hyperdrive. Destination, Kepler 442. The Phoenix shuddered as it entered hyperspace, leaving normal space behind in a flash of twisted light. They would arrive at the alien system in 6 hours. Jake used that time to review everything they knew about the system, which wasn't much. It had 3 planets that might support life and several moons. Before today, it had seemed like just another empty system. Now it might be the place where humanity first met another intelligent species. Jake hoped they would arrive in time to actually meet them, instead of just finding their graves. As the ship raced through hyperspace toward an unknown fate, Jake stood on the bridge and watched the strange colors of folded space flow past the windows. Somewhere ahead of them, aliens were fighting for their lives against something called the Devourers. Soon, humanity would learn what it meant to be called upon as heroes by species they had never met. The Phoenix flew on through the void, carrying 5 humans toward their destiny among the stars. The Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Jake Martinez immediately knew they had arrived too late to stop whatever had happened here. The 3 planets that should have been green and blue were dark and brown, their surfaces scarred with massive wounds that could be seen from space. My God, whispered Amy Chen from the pilot's seat. What happened to those worlds? Lisa Parker was already scanning with the ship's sensors. I'm reading massive heat signatures on all 3 planets. Really big. Jake stared at the main screen, trying to understand what he was seeing. The planets looked like they had been chewed up and spit out. Dark lines crisscrossed their surfaces like scars, and strange structures that definitely weren't natural jutted up from the ground. Any sign of the aliens who sent the message? Jake asked. Lisa worked at her station for several minutes before answering. I'm getting a weak signal from the 4th moon of the outer planet. It's the same mathematical pattern as before, but much weaker. Put it on screen, Jake ordered. The message that appeared was shorter than the first one, and when Lisa translated, Jake felt his stomach drop. Still here? Still alive? Please hurry. They are coming for us soon. We cannot hold much longer. Tom Garcia was already suiting up in his combat armor. Captain, we need to get down there now. Jake nodded. Amy, take us to that moon. Full speed, but be ready to run if anything big comes after us. As the Phoenix moved deeper into the system, they got a better look at what had destroyed the 3 planets. Massive creatures crawled across the surfaces, each one the size of a city block. They moved like insects, but were clearly made of both metal and flesh. Behind them, they left nothing but bare rock and twisted metal. Those must be the Devourers, Jake said quietly. Look at the size of them. Rick Johnson, the engineer, was studying the sensor readings. Captain, those things aren't just big. They're eating everything. The planet's atmospheres, the soil, even the rock itself. They're turning everything into more of themselves. Katie, Brown, the ship's doctor, looked pale. How do you fight something like that? Before Jake could answer, Lisa called out, Captain, I'm getting a new signal. It's coming from the moon, and it's trying to communicate directly with us. Put it through, Jake said. The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything any human had ever heard. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with flowing water, musical and strange, but somehow beautiful. Unknown visitors, the voice said in perfect English, though with an odd rhythm. We greet you with hope and terror. I'm Veltar, speaker for the Etherian people. Are you the ones who answered our call? Jake stepped forward, even though he knew the alien couldn't see him. This is Captain Jake Martinez of the Earth ship Phoenix. We received your distress signal and came to help. What is your situation? There was a pause, then Veltar's voice came back, filled with emotion that somehow came through despite the alien language. You came. Someone actually came. We had given up hope that anyone would hear us in time. Tell us what happened here. Jake said, What are those creatures on your planets? The Devourers, Veltar said. And even through the translation, Jake could hear the fear in the alien's voice. They appeared 50 of your years ago at the edge of our galaxy. They consume everything living, and they are intelligent. They do not just kill for food. They enjoy causing fear and pain. They kept our people alive as long as possible, feeding on our terror as much as our bodies. Amy had guided the Phoenix to the moon where the aliens were hiding. Through the view screen, they could see a small base built into the moon's rocky surface. It looked fragile and temporary, like something built by refugees in a hurry. How many of you are left? Jake asked. On this moon, there are 300 of my people, Veltar replied. But we were once billions. The Devourers have destroyed 47 worlds of the Harmony Coalition. We are among the last survivors of our species. Jake felt anger building in his chest. These creatures weren't just killing for survival. They were torturing entire species to death for pleasure. Tell us about this Harmony Coalition. We were. A group of 63 different species that lived in peace together, Veltar explained. We shared knowledge, art, and friendship across hundreds of worlds none of us had ever known. War. We built our ships for exploration and beauty, not for fighting. When the Devourers came, we had no weapons, no soldiers, no understanding of how to fight. Tom Garcia was listening to every word, his face getting harder with each sentence. Captain, these people need our help. Whatever those things are, we can't just leave these aliens to die. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Veltar, we're coming down to your base. We want to meet you in person and learn more. About how we can help? You would risk yourselves for us? Veltar asked, surprise clear in his voice. You do not even know what we look like or who we are. You asked for help, Jake said simply. That's enough. The Phoenix landed near the alien base, and Jake led his crew outside in environmental suits. The base's airlock opened, and the first alien that humanity had ever met stepped out to greet them. Veltar was unlike anything they had imagined. He was tall and thin, almost 7 feet high, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. Light seemed to flow through his body in patterns that shifted with his emotions. He had 4 arms and moved with a grace that made him seem to float rather than walk. We're the humans, Veltar said, and his voice was even more beautiful in person. You are so different from us, yet you came when we called. Jake removed his helmet, trusting the base's atmosphere readings. We believe that when someone needs help, you help them if you can. It doesn't matter what species you are. Veltar led them inside the base, where they met more Etherians. All of them were beautiful in their own way, with crystal skin and flowing movements. But Jake could see the fear in their large, multicolored eyes. These were people who had never known violence until it had destroyed their entire civilization. Tell us more about the other species in your coalition, Jake said as they sat in what passed for a meeting room. Veltar gestured, and images appeared in the air above them. The Depth Singers live in the oceans of water worlds. They communicate through sound and have never built weapons. The Grove Tenders are plant-like beings who grow their cities instead of building them. They believe all life is sacred. Cloud. Dancers live in gas giant atmospheres and think in ways we barely understand, but they are gentle and wise. Each species Veltar described sounded more peaceful than the last. Jake began to understand the scale of the tragedy. Dozens of intelligent species, each with their own culture and way of life, were being systematically murdered by creatures that enjoyed causing pain. "How many of the coalition species are left?" Katie asked. Veltar's light patterns turned dark blue, which Jake was learning meant sadness. Perhaps 10 species still survive, scattered across hidden bases like this one. The rest are gone forever. Their art, their knowledge, their unique ways of seeing the universe, all consumed by the Devourers. Rick had been studying the bases. Technology. Your ships and equipment are incredibly advanced, but they're all designed for peaceful purposes. No weapons, no armor, no military systems at all. "We never needed such things," Veltar said. "For thousands of years, the Coalition lived in harmony. We settled our differences through discussion and compromise. We explored the galaxy together, sharing discoveries and celebrating our differences. War was something we had heard about. In ancient stories, not something we ever expected to face." Tom had been quiet during most of the conversation, but now he spoke up. "Veltar, these Devourers, are they still on your planets?" "Yes," Veltar replied. "They consume slowly, savoring their feast. They know we are here, but they are not worried. What could we do to stop them?" Tom looked at Jake, and Jake saw something in the Marine's eyes that he recognized. It was the look of a predator that had found prey that needed killing. "Maybe more than you think," Jake said quietly. "We humans come from a different kind of world than you do. We've had to fight to survive. For our entire history, we might know some things about war that could help." Veltar's crystal body brightened with hope. "You would teach us to fight. You would help us save what is left of our people." Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same determination in all their faces. They were 5 humans with one small ship, facing creatures that had destroyed entire star systems. But they had something the Coalition had never had. They understood violence, and they weren't afraid to use it to protect the innocent. "We'll do more than teach you," Jake said. "We'll fight alongside you. Nobody should have to face monsters like that alone." 3 weeks after the Phoenix arrived at the alien moon base, more human ships began appearing in the system. Jake Martinez watched from the command center as the UES Ranger, a military vessel twice the size of his exploration ship, took position. Near the moon, behind it came 2 more ships, the cargo vessel US Supply and another exploration ship called the US Scout. "Commander." Steve Davis contacted Jake as soon as the Ranger was in position. Jake had known Steve for years, and he was glad to see a familiar face on the communication screen. "Jake, what's the situation down there?" Steve asked. His voice was calm, but Jake could see the tension in his old friend's eyes. "It's worse than we reported," Jake replied. "These Devourers aren't just eating the planets. They're doing it slowly on purpose, to cause as much fear and pain as possible. The aliens here have never fought a war in their entire history. They don't even understand the concept of weapons." Steve nodded grimly. "Well, they're about to get a crash course. We've got 50 Marines on board, and enough firepower to level. A small city. What do you recommend?" Before Jake could answer, Veltar entered the human command center. The crystal alien had learned to move more carefully around humans after accidentally startling Katie Brown on his first visit. The Etherians were much taller and moved differently than humans, and it had taken time for both species to get comfortable around each other. Commander Davis, Veltar said, his musical voice coming through the translation system. "We're grateful that more humans have come to help us. But I must ask, what can your weapons do against creatures the size of mountains?" Steve studied the tactical displays showing the Devourers on the nearby planets. Each creature was indeed massive, easily the size of a human city, with thick armor plating and what looked like weapon systems growing from their bodies. "That's a good question," Steve admitted. "Jake, have you learned anything about their weaknesses?" Jake brought up the data that Rick Johnson had been collecting. Rick has been analyzing the sensor readings. The Devourers are part machine, part living tissue. They're incredibly tough, but they seem to have some kind of central nervous system. If we could find their control centers and damage them, we might be able to stop them. The problem is getting close enough, Rick added, joining the conversation. Their skin is thicker than ship armor, and they have defensive weapons that can shoot down anything that gets near them. Tom Garcia had been unusually quiet since the other ships arrived, but now he spoke up. What if we don't attack from the outside? What if we get inside them? Everyone looked at the Marine sergeant. Tom was cleaning his rifle, as he did whenever he was thinking hard about a problem. Explain, Steve said. Tom set down his weapon and walked to the tactical display. Look at these things. They're huge, right? And that means they probably have internal spaces, maybe even air, so their living parts can function. If we could get a small team inside one of them, we might be able to do serious damage from within. Veltar's crystal body flickered with patterns that Jake had learned meant confusion. You would willingly enter the body of a devourer. That sounds like certain death. Tom shrugged. Maybe. But sitting here waiting for them to come to us is also certain death. At least this way, we might take one of them with us. Few days, more Coalition survivors began arriving at the moonbase. They came in small, damaged ships, refugees from other destroyed worlds. Jake met representatives of several different species, and each encounter taught him more about how different. The aliens were from humans. The depth singers were aquatic beings who looked like intelligent dolphins with hands. They communicated through complex songs that were beautiful to hear, but took time to translate. They had lived in vast underwater cities and had never developed any technology for land-based warfare. The grove tenders were even stranger. They looked like walking trees with bark-like skin and branches instead of arms. They moved slowly and thought even more slowly, taking hours to make decisions that humans would make in minutes. Their entire culture was based on growth and patience, concepts that didn't help much in a war. But as Jake talked to more species, he began to see something the Coalition had never noticed about themselves. Each species had abilities that could be turned into weapons if they were willing to use them. The depth singers can produce sounds that shatter metal, Jake explained to Steve during one of their planning sessions. They use it to break up rocks in their ocean environments. But they've never thought to use it as a weapon. And the grove tenders can control plant growth, Rick added. They could probably grow barriers or even biological weapons if they wanted to. But they think it would be morally wrong to hurt any living thing. Steve was studying profiles of all the Coalition species. These people have incredible abilities, but they've never had to use them for fighting. It's like they're all pacifists. By choice and by nature. That's exactly what they are, Jake said. And it's going to get them all killed if we can't change their thinking. The breakthrough came when Marine Colonel Linda Rodriguez arrived with the UES Defender, a ship full of combat engineers and heavy weapons. Linda was a small woman with gray hair and hard eyes, who had fought in more battles than anyone else in the human fleet. When she saw the Coalition aliens, she immediately understood what needed to be done. These people need to learn how to think. Like soldiers, she told Jake and Steve. Not just how to use weapons, but how to think tactically. They need to understand that sometimes you have to destroy something to save something else. Linda began training sessions with volunteers from each species. It was slow work. The aliens had trouble understanding concepts like ambush tactics, strategic retreats, and acceptable losses. But gradually, some of them began to grasp the brutal mathematics of warfare. The first real test came when a small devourer, only about the size of a building, approached the moonbase. It was a scout, searching for the survivors that it knew were hiding somewhere in the system. "This is our chance," Linda announced. "We need to kill this thing and prove to the Coalition that the devourers can be beaten." The attack was planned carefully. Human ships would distract the creature from the front, while a mixed team of humans and aliens approached from behind. The aliens would use their natural abilities as weapons while the humans provided tactical support and firepower. Tom Garcia led the ground team, accompanied by 3 human Marines and 2 volunteers from each alien species. The Etherian volunteer was a young artist named Zara, whose crystal body could generate intense light. The depth singer was an engineer called Resonance, who could produce focused sound waves. The grove tender was a philosopher named Deep Root, who had been convinced that Fighting to protect life was different from fighting to destroy it. The battle was chaotic and terrifying. The Devourer was smaller than its cousins on the planets, but it was still massive and heavily armed. It fired energy beams that could melt rock and had tentacle-like appendages that tried to grab the attacking ships, but the combined human-alien team worked. Zara's light beams blinded the creature's sensors while Resonance's sound waves cracked its armor plating. Deeproot grew thick vines that tangled the Devourer's appendages, and the human marines poured concentrated fire into the weak spots they created. When the creature finally died, its death scream echoed across the moon's surface. For the first time in 50 years, a Devourer had been killed by Coalition forces. The psychological impact was enormous. Word spread quickly among the surviving Coalition species that the Devourers could be beaten. More importantly, they had learned that their own abilities could be used as weapons when combined with human tactical thinking. "You see," Jake said to Velta, as they watched the alien volunteers celebrating their victory, "you're not helpless. You never were. You just needed to learn how to fight." Veltar's crystal body was glowing brightly with patterns Jake had learned meant excitement and hope. "The humans have given us something we lost long ago. They've given us the will to resist." But even as they celebrated, everyone knew this was just the beginning. The small Devourer had been alone and relatively weak. The real test would come when they faced the massive creatures on the planets, the ones that had destroyed entire worlds. Engineer Don Clark had been working with Coalition technology, trying to understand how their advanced systems could be modified. For war, he approached Jake with a proposal that seemed impossible. "Captain, I think I know how we can hurt the big ones," Dan said. "But it's going to require the Coalition to do something they've never done before. They're going to have to destroy some of their own technology to save the rest." Jake listened as Dan explained his plan. It was dangerous, maybe even suicidal, but it was also brilliant in its simplicity. If it worked, they might be able to turn the Coalition's peaceful technology into the most powerful weapons the galaxy had ever seen. If it failed, they would all die. But as Jake looked around at the mixed group of humans and aliens preparing for war, he realized they were all thinking the same thing: death. Fighting for something important was better than death hiding and waiting for the end. The war for the galaxy was about to begin in earnest. And for the first time since the Devourers had appeared, the prey were ready to become predators. 6 months after the first human ships arrived in the Kepler system, Admiral Jack Peterson stood on the bridge of the massive battleship U.S. Freedom and watched the largest fleet in human history prepare for battle. 50 human warships floated, in formation alongside 200 Coalition vessels that had been rebuilt and armed using human designs. The target was Centauri Prime, a world that had once been home to 15 billion Coalition citizens. Now it crawled with the largest concentration of Devourers anyone had ever seen. Intelligence reports counted at least 30 of the massive creatures, each one the size of a human city, working together to strip the planet bare. "Admiral, all ships report ready," announced Captain Maria Santos from her position at the tactical station. Maria had volunteered for this mission knowing it would probably be her last. Her ship, the UES Vengeance, was loaded with enough explosives to crack a moon and a half. Jack nodded grimly. The plan they were about to execute had been developed by human and Coalition strategists, working together for months. It was called the Moscow Protocol, named after an ancient Earth battle where desperate defenders had burned their own city, rather than let enemies take it. "Open a channel to all ships," Jack ordered. The communication system connected him to every vessel in the fleet. Human captains sat alongside Coalition commanders who had learned to think like soldiers. Etherian crystal beings worked next to Depth Singer aquatic specialists. Grove Tender plant people operated weapon systems they had grown specifically for this battle. "Everyone knows the plan," Jack said into his microphone. "The Devourers have been winning because they're bigger and stronger than us. Today, we turn that advantage against them. We're going to make them wish they had never heard of the Coalition or humanity." The battle began with long-range bombardment. Human missile cruisers and coalition energy weapons platforms opened fire from beyond the Devourer's defensive range. Most of the shots were absorbed by the creature's thick armor, but some found weak spots and caused real damage. The Devourers responded exactly as the human strategists had predicted. Instead of staying spread out across the planet's surface, they began moving together into a tight formation to concentrate their defensive fire. It was smart tactics against a normal enemy, but it was exactly what the Allied fleet wanted them to do. Phase 2, Jack announced. Maria, you're clear to proceed. Captain Maria Santos guided the UES Vengeance toward the planet's surface, followed by 12 other ships that had volunteered for the suicide mission. Each ship was piloted by volunteers who knew they weren't coming back. The ships dove toward the Devourer formation, their hulls glowing red from atmospheric friction. This is Vengeance. Maria's voice crackled over the radio. Beginning final approach. I tell my family I died fighting monsters. The Devourers focused all their weapons on the incoming ships, pouring so much firepower into space that it looked like a second sun had appeared above the planet. One by one, the human ships were destroyed by the intense defensive fire, but 3 ships made it through. Maria's ship, the Vengeance, slammed into the largest Devourer at near light speed. Explosion was so bright it could be seen from orbit, and when the light faded, the massive creature was gone. 2 other ships struck their targets a few seconds later, and suddenly the Devourer formation had lost 3 of its largest members. More importantly, the surviving Devourers had lost their coordination. For the first time in the war, the creatures seemed confused and disorganized. All ships, advance, Jack ordered. Hit them while they're confused. The Allied fleet dove toward the planet like a swarm of angry insects. Human fighters weaved between Devourer defense beams, while coalition ships used their unique abilities to create chaos among the enemy ranks. The Depth Singers had developed sonic torpedoes that could shatter Devourer armor from the inside. Grove Tenders had grown biological missiles that released clouds of Earth bacteria, making the creatures sick and slow. The Etherians had learned to focus their natural light into laser beams powerful enough to cut through metal. But the ground battle was where the real innovation showed. Sergeant Carl Williams led mixed squads of humans and aliens into the tunnels that honeycombed the planet's surface. These were spaces the Devourers had carved out for their young, and fighting there was like entering the belly of a beast. Stay. Close and watch each other's backs. Carl radioed to his team as they moved through a tunnel that pulsed with organic light. His squad included 2 human Marines, an Etherian named Bright Song, a Depth Singer called Echo, and a Grove Tender who had chosen the war name Thorn. The tunnels were a nightmare landscape of metal and flesh fused together, Devourer young each. One the size of a human house, crawled along the walls and ceiling. They were smaller than their parents, but just as hungry and twice as fast. Contact front, shouted Private Kelly Brooks, opening fire with her assault rifle. The bullets barely scratched the young Devourer's armor, but they got its attention. Bright Song stepped forward, her crystal body blazing with light that turned the tunnel bright as day. The young Devourer recoiled, its sensors overloaded by the sudden brilliance. Echo followed up with a focused sound pulse that cracked the creature's armor. Thorn finished it by growing razor-sharp thorns that punched through the weakened. Spots. Good teamwork, Carl said as they moved deeper into the tunnel system. Remember, we're not here to fight every creature we see. Our job is to plant these charges near their breeding chambers and get out alive. The explosives they carried were a joint human coalition development. Human chemical explosives were combined with Grove Tender biological agents that would spread through the Devourer tunnel systems like a disease, killing everything they touched. As Carl's team moved deeper underground, the space battle above them was reaching its climax. Admiral Jack Peterson watched his tactical displays as the tide of battle slowly turned in favor of the Allied fleet. "Admiral, the Devourers are beginning to retreat," reported his tactical officer. 3 more of the large ones have been destroyed, and the rest are moving toward the planet's dark side. Jack felt a moment of satisfaction, but he knew better than to celebrate too early. Keep pressure on them. Don't let them regroup. The retreat became a rout, as more coalition ships arrived from other systems. Word of the battle had spread, and species that had been hiding in fear for 50 years suddenly found the courage to join the fight. Aquatic battleships from the Depthsinger homeworld rose from deep ocean trenches. Grove-tender bioships grew from seeds that had been planted months ago. Even the mysterious cloud dancers sent crystalline vessels that moved like living things through space, down in the tunnels. Carl's team had reached their target, a vast chamber where hundreds of young devourers were being incubated in pools of organic fluid. The sight was horrifying, but Carl forced himself to focus on the mission. "Plant the charges around the chamber walls," he ordered. "We've got 10 minutes to get clear before they detonate." As his team worked, they heard sounds coming from deeper in the tunnel system. Heavy footsteps and metallic scraping noises that meant adult devourers were heading their way. "Time to go," Carl announced as the last charge was planted. "Everyone, move now." The team ran through the tunnels as fast as they could, but the sounds behind them were getting closer. When they finally reached the surface, they had less than 2 minutes before the explosives would detonate. "All teams, clear the blast zone," Carl radioed as they sprinted toward their extraction point. The explosion, when it came, was felt across the entire planet. The charges not only destroyed the breeding chamber, but caused a chain reaction that collapsed thousands of tunnels throughout the Devourer tunnel network. Above them, the space battle was ending. The surviving Devourers were fleeing the system, leaving behind the corpses of their dead and the ruins of their invasion force. Admiral Jack Peterson allowed himself a small smile as he watched the enemy retreat. "Signal all ships. Centauri Prime is liberated." The celebration that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For the first time in 50 years, the Devourers had been completely defeated in a major battle. More importantly, the coalition species had learned that they could fight back and win. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. Intelligence reports suggested there were Devourer forces throughout the galaxy, and they would not take this defeat lightly. The enemy would adapt and return with new tactics and weapons. However, the coalition had changed too. The gentle races that had once been helpless victims were now learning to be warriors. And they had humanity to teach them that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be willing to fight for it. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, the good guys were winning. 2 years after the Battle of Centauri Prime, General Paul Thompson stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, the largest warship humanity had ever built. Around him, the greatest fleet in galactic history prepared for the final battle of the war. 3,000 ships from dozens of species filled the space around him, all of them heading toward the same destination, the Devourer. Home system, Paul looked out at the fleet and marveled at how much had changed. The coalition ships no longer looked like the peaceful exploration vessels they had once been. They were covered in armor plating and bristled with weapons that combined human engineering with alien technology. More importantly, they were crewed by beings who had learned to think like soldiers. "General, we're receiving a transmission from the Coalition flagship," announced Lieutenant Bob Hayes from the communications station. "Put it through," Paul replied. The main screen showed the bridge of the Harmony's Hope, a massive Etherian vessel that served as the Coalition's command ship. Admiral Veltar appeared on screen, his crystal body now bearing scars from 2 years of warfare. The gentle diplomat Jake Martinez had first met was gone, replaced by a warrior who had learned that sometimes violence was the only way to protect. "Peace, General Thompson," Veltar said, his musical voice now carrying the hard edge of command authority. "All Coalition forces report ready for the final assault. My people are eager to end this war once and for all." Paul nodded. He had grown to respect Veltar over the past 2 years. The Etherian had proven to be a quick learner and a capable military commander. More importantly, he had convinced his own people and the other Coalition species that fighting for survival was not the same as becoming monsters. "What's the status of the biological weapons?" Paul asked. Dr. Nancy Green appeared on a smaller screen. She had spent the last year developing the ultimate weapon against the Devourers, an engineered virus that would attack their unique biology. It was based on Earth's bacteria that had been modified to target the specific way Devourer cells worked. "The weapons are ready," General Nancy reported. "Once we deploy them in the Devourer home system, every creature there will be dead within 72 hours. But I have to warn you again, this will completely sterilize their worlds. Nothing will ever grow there again." Paul felt the weight of that decision. We're about to commit genocide on a scale that made the Devourer's own. Crimes seemed small. But after seeing what the creatures had done to the Coalition worlds, after watching entire species disappear forever, he knew there was no other choice. "The decision has been made," Paul said firmly. "The Devourers have proven they cannot be reasoned with or contained. They exist only to cause suffering and death. Today we make sure they can never hurt anyone again." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Devourer home system, and what they saw there made even the most experienced warriors pause in shock. The system contained 7 planets, and every single one of them was covered in Devourers. Millions of the creatures moved across the planetary surfaces like a living carpet of metal and flesh. "My God," whispered Captain Alex Parker from his position on the Retribution's bridge. Alex had been born after the war started, and his great-grandmother had been among the first humans to answer the Coalition's call for help. For him, this war was all he had ever known. "All ships, battle stations," Paul ordered. "Remember, our job is to get close enough to deploy the biological weapons. Everything else is secondary." The Devourers had been waiting for them. As soon as the Allied fleet appeared, massive defense platforms emerged from behind the planets, each one the size of a small moon. The creatures had learned from their defeats and had prepared their home system for exactly this kind of attack. The battle that followed was the largest in galactic history. Energy beams and missile barrages filled the space between planets as 3,000 Allied ships fought against millions of Devourer defenders. Ships exploded like fireworks against the darkness of space, taking their crews with them into death. But the Allied fleet kept advancing. Human commanders used tactics learned from centuries of warfare on Earth. Coalition species deployed abilities that had been refined through 2 years of constant fighting. The gentle races that had once been victims now fought with a fury that surprised even themselves. Captain Lisa Wade piloted her fighter through a swarm of Devourer interceptors, her ship dancing between enemy fire with skills that would have been impossible before the war. Beside her flew an Etherian pilot whose crystal body blazed with light that blinded enemy sensors, and a depth singer whose ship sang with frequencies that disrupted Devourer communications. "This is Fighter Squadron 7, Lisa radioed as she lined up for an attack run on a defense platform. "We're going in. Cover us." The squadron dove toward their target, weaving between defensive fire that could vaporize a ship in an instant. Half of them were destroyed before they reached the platform, but the survivors managed to plant their charges and escape as the massive structure exploded behind them. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as the Allied fleet slowly fought its way toward the inner planets. The cost was enormous. For every Devourer defender they destroyed, they lost ships and crews of their own. But they kept advancing, driven by the knowledge that this was their one chance to end the war forever. On the Retribution's bridge, Paul watched the tactical displays as his fleet took heavy casualties. They had lost nearly half their ships, but they were close enough to the Devourer homeworlds to deploy the biological weapons. "Dr. Green, are you ready?" Paul asked. "Ready, General," Nancy replied from her laboratory ship. "Beginning deployment now." Across the fleet, specially modified ships began releasing clouds of the engineered virus into space. The microscopic weapons spread quickly, carried by solar winds and magnetic fields toward the Devourer-infested planets. The effect was almost immediate. Devourer ships began losing power as their biological components started failing. The massive creatures on the planetary surfaces slowed their movements and then stopped altogether. Within hours, the most feared predators in galactic history were dying by the billions. But the Devourers had one last surprise. As their forces weakened, they began activating weapons that had been hidden throughout their home system. Massive bombs that could destroy entire planets started counting down toward detonation. "They're going to blow up their own worlds, rather." "Then let us have them," reported the tactical officer. Paul made a split-second decision that saved millions of lives. All ships, retreat to minimum safe distance. Let them destroy themselves if that's what they want. The Allied fleet pulled back just as the first planet exploded. One by one, the Devourer homeworlds detonated in nuclear fire, taking with them every trace of the species that had terrorized the galaxy for 50 years. When the explosions finally ended, nothing remained but radioactive debris floating in space. The war was over. The victory celebration lasted for months and stretched across hundreds of worlds. But for Paul Thompson, the real satisfaction came from something much quieter. He stood in the memorial hall on Earth, looking at the names of every human who had died in the war. Thousands of names, from Captain Maria Santos, who had sacrificed herself at Centauri, prime to the fighter pilots who had died in the final battle. Beside the human memorial stood monuments to the coalition species that had been lost to the Devourers, entire civilizations that would never be seen again, their art and knowledge lost forever. But thanks to the sacrifice of humans and the courage of the surviving coalition races, no other species would suffer the same fate. Ambassador Rachel Stone approached Paul as he stood before the memorials. She had been appointed as humanity's representative to the reformed coalition government, and she carried news from across the galaxy. The last Devourer strongholds have been eliminated, she reported. Intelligence confirms that the species is completely extinct. The galaxy is finally safe. Paul nodded, feeling both satisfaction and sadness. What about the coalition? How are they adjusting to peace? Rachel smiled. Better than expected. They're keeping their military forces active, but they're using them for exploration and disaster relief instead of warfare. The Grove Tenders are using their biological weapons to clean up polluted worlds. The Depth Singers are using their sonic abilities to help with construction projects. They've learned that strength can be used to build as well as destroy. And they remember what we taught them? Oh yes, Rachel said with certainty. They'll never be helpless victims again. But more importantly, they understand that being able to fight doesn't mean you have to become evil. You can be strong and still be good. Paul looked out through the memorial hall's windows at the stars beyond Earth, somewhere out there. Former victims were now guardians, protecting new species and exploring the galaxy with confidence instead of fear. The humans had given them the knowledge of war, but the coalition had taught humanity something just as valuable. That strength without compassion was just another form of evil. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love was the willingness to fight for those who could not fight for themselves, and in learning that lesson, both humanity and the coalition had become something greater than either could have been alone.